It was a bustling afternoon at the airport. Travelers moved briskly through the terminal, dragging suitcases, exchanging laughter, arguing, or simply looking weary from long-haul flights. Flight 227 to West Africa was ready for boarding. In the first-class lounge, a handful of passengers relaxed with drinks in hand, eyes fixed on their phones. Seated quietly among them was a man dressed in a simple black kaftan. His shoes were spotless, though modest. His bag was compact, his demeanor calm and unreadable. He said little but observed everything. In his hand was a first-class boarding pass. A few people glanced his way, then looked again. A black man, alone in the first-class lounge, dressed plainly. He didn't match the corporate look. No fancy watch, no laptop bag. Still, he waited there patiently, just like the others. Then came the announcement. First-class passengers, please proceed to Gate 4. The man rose and made his way to the line. The gate attendant, a slim woman with sleek blonde hair pinned in a bun and bright red lipstick, greeted the well-dressed white man in front of him with a warm smile. Her name tag read Clara. She scanned his ticket and beamed. "Welcome aboard, sir." Then came the quiet man. She looked him over. His dark skin, unadorned clothes, and her smile quickly disappeared. She lifted her arm to block him. "I believe you're in the wrong lane, sir. This line is for first class." He silently handed her his ticket. She studied it, her face tightening. "Seat 2A. Her eyes narrowed. "This can't be right," she muttered, mostly to herself. She gave him another once-over, her expression full of doubt. "Sir, passengers of your background don't typically fly in this section. You probably meant to book economy." Nearby passengers began to take notice. "I'm sorry," he asked, his voice calm. Clara raised her voice. "This seat isn't for someone like you. It's possible someone else used your payment method by mistake." A young woman behind him gasped. A man in business attire frowned. Several passengers lifted their phones. Recording had begun. Still, Clara pressed on. "Let's not make a scene. We'll process a refund for you. Please step aside so others can board." The man didn't budge. His eyes remained gentle but firm. "I purchased a first-class seat. 2A. That's mine." Clara scoffed. "You probably can't even pronounce the airline's name, and you want to sit in first class." Murmurs spread through the line. Then a younger male attendant in glasses approached. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, wary. Clara leaned in. "He's trying to sneak into first class with a fake ticket," she whispered. The junior attendant took the boarding pass and scanned it. A soft beep, a green light. "It's valid," he said quietly. Clara's jaw clenched. "That doesn't change anything. Just look at him. Does he look like someone who belongs in 2A? By now, a handful of phones were aimed in their direction. The man politely stepped aside to let a woman and her baby pass. Then he turned back to Clara. "I don't want conflict," he said. "I only want to take the seat I paid for." The junior attendant hesitated. "Clara, maybe we should just— You want to risk your job over this?" she snapped. The man took a slow step forward. "I will now take my seat," he said. Clara stiffened. Her grip on the situation was unraveling. Finally, she moved aside, though she hissed, "Don't say I didn't warn you. Let's see how long you last in that seat." He passed through the gate quietly. Eyes followed him, some with empathy, others with confusion. Inside the aircraft, the lighting was soft and the air scented faintly of leather and cologne. He located seat 2A by the window. He stowed his bag overhead and sat down. From his pocket, he pulled out a small notebook and pen. Silently, he began to write. No sigh, no expression, just stillness. A few minutes later, Clara entered the cabin. She stared at him briefly, then turned away to begin the drink service, pretending he wasn't there. 3 rows back, François de Lysser, the French CEO, adjusted his tie and glanced at the man. He said nothing. A soft chime echoed overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are now preparing for takeoff. Please fasten your seat belts." The announcement echoed gently through the cabin. The man in 2A shut his notebook and turned toward the window just as the engines began to hum with power. As the aircraft lifted and climbed into the sky, the earth fell away beneath the clouds. But inside the plane, a different kind of turbulence was only beginning to stir. No one on board, not the polished CEO, not the spiteful flight attendant, not even the onlookers watching with cautious curiosity, knew who the quiet man in seat 2A truly was. But they would learn soon enough. And when they did, their shame would be unforgettable. The plane glided above the clouds, a silver arrow slicing through the sky. In the first-class cabin, everything appeared calm, luxurious, even. Yet beneath the surface, tension crackled like static. The man in 2A sat still, seat belt snug across his waist. He didn't request champagne or stretch out in comfort like his fellow passengers. Instead, he gazed quietly out the window, his eyes thoughtful and far away. He had the look of someone who had witnessed much and spoken little of it. Flight attendant Clara made her rounds with a tray of drinks and forced smiles. To everyone else, she was cheerful, attentive. But as she approached 2B, next to him, her expression shifted. The older woman in 2B, draped in pearls, asked politely for green tea. Clara responded sweetly, then turned to the man beside her. "What'll you have?" she asked, her tone flat, her warmth gone. He looked up, unbothered. "Just water, please," she huffed. "Still or sparkling?" "Still." Clara returned with the bottle and, without a word or even a napkin, dropped it carelessly onto his tray table. It wobbled, almost toppling. He caught it with a steady hand, screwed the cap and took a sip, unshaken. Across the aisle, François de Lysser, the French executive, watched with narrowed eyes. Clara's behavior bothered him. The man in 2A hadn't spoken much, but there was something quiet and commanding about him, like a man who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Clara moved on, handing out hot towels. She skipped 2A entirely. He said nothing, but others noticed. The woman in 2B leaned toward him and whispered, "Why is she treating you that way? You've been nothing but polite." Further back, a man nudged his wife. "I don't think she believes he's supposed to be in that seat." Meanwhile, in the economy section, life buzzed on. Crying babies, laughter, the occasional bump of turbulence. But in first class, the air was thick with quiet judgment. At the front of the cabin, the younger male attendant from before approached Clara. "Can I have a word?" he asked. She rolled her eyes. "What now?" Leaning closer, he said under his breath, "You need to stop. People are watching. Some are recording." She sneered. "Let them. Let the whole world watch. That man might have paid for his seat, but that doesn't mean he belongs in it. He knows it, and so do I." The young attendant's face turned pale. "That's not your call. You're out of line." "No," she said sharply, her voice low and bitter. "He's out of place. They want to act like royalty, sit in luxury, pretend they belong. Well, let them feel the heat." Just then, the plane jolted with a sharp bump. Passengers grabbed their armrests. The captain's voice crackled overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're encountering light turbulence. Please remain seated and keep your seat belts fastened." Clara walked the aisle checking belts. 2A, she paused again. "You might want to buckle up tight," she said with a smirk. "Wouldn't want you flying out of your seat." He looked at her, steady as stone. "Thank you," he said simply. The unexpected courtesy caught her off guard. She frowned and moved on. When the turbulence passed and the calm returned, lunch service began. Meals were placed gently before each first-class passenger. Clara reached 2A, dropped his tray without a word, and turned to leave. "Hope it's good enough for you," she muttered. He examined the plate, then nodded. "Thank you. That was enough." François de Lysser leaned toward Clara. His voice was low but sharp. "Excuse me," he said, "but why are you treating that gentleman with such disdain?" Clara's cheeks flushed crimson. "Sir, I suggest you mind your own business." François de Lysser didn't flinch. I paid for a peaceful journey, not to witness a paying passenger be humiliated." Heads nodded across the cabin. Someone near the back gave a single, slow clap. Clara spun around and stormed toward the galley, her heels clicking furiously. Once inside, she paced in circles, seething. How dare they defend him? She fumed. Who does he think he is? Meanwhile, in seat 2A, the quiet man leaned back and closed his eyes. He breathed slowly, deeply. He had weathered many storms in his life, some in the air, most on the ground. But this storm was different. It wasn't just about skin or status. It was about worth, about quiet resistance, about dignity unshaken by disgrace. His hand slipped into his coat pocket and brushed against a folded piece of cloth, a symbol of his homeland. He hadn't worn it today. He didn't need to. It was stitched into his soul. Then came the voice over the intercom. Cabin crew, prepare for arrival. We will be landing in approximately 30 minutes. The cabin stirred to life. Seatbacks straightened. Trays were cleared. Bags zipped shut. Yet, the tension lingered, unspoken but thick. Clara returned, walking the aisle with cold precision. She stopped at 2A and folded her arms. I suggest that next time you book the cabin that suits you, she sneered. You're lucky we didn't remove you before takeoff. He met her gaze with unshakable calm. Sometimes, he said, where we choose to sit isn't just about comfort. It's about making room for change. His voice was gentle, yet it rang with weight. The words settled over her like stones. She didn't fully understand them, but they made her feel small. Outside, the clouds gave way to glittering city lights as the plane began its descent over Ouagadougou. As passengers prepared to disembark, the man in 2A stood, collected his modest bag, and waited silently. No one, not Clara, not Francois, not the dozens who had watched through curious lenses, understood the truth. When those wheels touched the tarmac, the quiet man would not exit merely as a passenger. He would step off as the most powerful man on that aircraft. The plane landed with a soft bounce. The cabin lights flickered on, and a smooth voice announced, "Welcome to Ouagadougou. Please remain seated until we come to a full stop." A gentle applause rippled through the cabin. Some passengers stretched, others yawned, but all eyes in first class stayed fixed on the man in 2A. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't retaliated, hadn't flinched. He had sat through humiliation with the poise of a mountain, still unmoved. And yet, Clara couldn't leave it alone. As passengers unbuckled and reached for their luggage, she returned one last time, eyes locked on him. "I wish you'd never boarded this plane," she hissed under her breath. He looked up slowly, offering no reply. Clara leaned closer, her voice a venomous whisper. "You smell like you haven't bathed in a month. You think first class makes you clean? It doesn't. It just makes the cabin stink." He blinked once, still silent, but his eyes, deep and ancient, looked straight through her. In 2B, the woman with the pearl earrings watched the exchange. She couldn't hear every word, but the venom in Clara's posture was unmistakable. "That's quite enough," the woman said sternly. Clara turned to her, startled. "Stay out of it." "I won't," the woman said firmly. "Your behavior is disgraceful." Clara let out a dry laugh. "You actually believe he belongs here? Look at him." Francois de Lyser rose from his seat, slow but deliberate. He spoke with the weight of a man who had heard and seen too much. "Clara," he said, "you've humiliated yourself, and this airline, and every one of us who watched and stayed quiet for too long." She froze. "He has done nothing wrong," Francois said. "He paid for his seat. He showed nothing but grace. And yet he was treated like a criminal. I don't know his name, but I know character, and he has more of it than most of us combined." Clara's face turned from red to ashen. "I followed protocol," she muttered. "We have standards." Francois's voice sharpened. "You didn't follow protocol. You followed prejudice. And now everyone can see it." More passengers had gathered at the front, drawn by the rising voices. Many had recorded it all. Some watched in quiet shock. Others stood in solidarity. But none looked away from the man in 2A. He didn't need to speak, because when he finally walked down that jet bridge, the world waiting beyond would know. He carried the soul of a nation, and the strength of its leader. Others had seen everything, from the first insult to the final silence. Phones were still raised, recording. The cabin door opened with a hiss, letting in a breath of warm air. Outside, airport staff stood at the bottom of the stairs, waiting to assist. But something felt different. A sleek black car was parked on the tarmac, its windows dark, its presence commanding. Beside it, 5 uniformed soldiers stood at rigid attention. A red carpet had been rolled out along the steps. Passengers leaned toward the windows, murmuring, "Is there a celebrity on board? Must be a prince or something. Royalty, maybe?" Clara furrowed her brow. No VIP notice was sent. "We weren't informed." Then came a tap on her shoulder. It was the junior flight attendant, the one who had scanned the ticket in Paris. He held out his phone, face pale. "You should see this." She snatched the phone and looked at the screen. It was a photograph. Her breath caught. It was the man from 2A, only now in full military uniform, standing on a grand platform. Thousands gathered before him. Soldiers stood in salute. A national flag rippled behind him. The caption beneath the image read, "President Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso." Clara's hands began to shake. She looked up, scanning the cabin. He was standing now, lifting his modest bag from the overhead bin with quiet grace. "No," she whispered. "No, this can't be." She stepped forward, voice breaking. "Wait, sir." He turned slowly. She hesitated. "I didn't know. I didn't mean to offend you." His gaze met hers, calm, unflinching. His voice, when it came, was quiet, but it rang through her soul. "Would it have mattered?" he asked gently. "Would you have treated me differently if you had known?" Her mouth parted. No words came. He held her gaze a moment longer, then said, "Respect isn't owed to power. It's owed to people." And with that, he turned and walked off the plane. Outside, the sun bathed the tarmac in gold. The soldiers snapped to a salute. An aide opened the car door, but President Traoré paused. He turned and looked up at the aircraft. Not in anger, not in triumph, but in silent remembrance of what had just happened, of what still must change. Inside the cabin, passengers watched from their windows, some with tears in their eyes. Others sat still, humbled. François de Lysser exited shortly after and caught up to him. "Mr. President," he said, voice low, heavy, "please accept my deepest apologies. I didn't know. But now, I see." President Traoré smiled faintly. "Sometimes," he replied, "we must walk low to see how deep others' hearts really are." They shook hands beneath the open sky. Back in the aircraft, Clara slumped into a seat, her face pale, her hands trembling. The junior attendant stood nearby, voice quiet but firm. "You didn't just insult a president," he said. "You insulted every one of us who looks like him." The cockpit door opened. The captain emerged, his expression grim. "Prepare a report," he told her. "There will be consequences." Clara buried her face in her hands. Outside, cameras flashed. The red carpet stretched long. And the man from seat 2A entered his car, not with pride, but with purpose. He had boarded a passenger. He had landed a lesson. By the time the last passenger left the plane, videos were already flooding the internet. The story had gone viral. Clara's cruelty, François' defense, the president's calm. The world was watching. In the immigration hall, the airport buzzed. President Traoré was on the flight. Clara insulted him. She didn't know who he was. That's the problem. Clara now stood in a small office near the jet bridge. The airline manager paced in front of her, livid. "Do you realize what you've done?" "I didn't know who he was," she whispered, broken. "That's exactly it," he snapped. "It's not about who he is. It's about what you said." He held up a tablet and replayed the footage. Her voice echoed in the tiny room. "This flight is not for the person of your color. You smell like someone who hasn't bathed in a month." Tears streamed down her cheeks. "I was doing my job," she said, barely audible. "No," the manager said coldly. "You were abusing your power." And this isn't the first time. She looked up, startled. What do you mean? We've had complaints, he said. Plenty. You think no one notices? You think we weren't watching? Her face went blank. Silent. A knock came on the door. Enter, President Traoré said. His aide stepped in, holding a folder. Mr. President, the UN Secretary-General is requesting a statement. So are several African Union leaders. They're calling your words historic. Traoré nodded slowly but didn't speak. The aide glanced at the drawer. Was that the letter? Yes, Traoré said. She wrote it by hand. And he leaned back in his chair, looking out at the courtyard where children played, diplomats passed, and the flag of Burkina Faso fluttered high against the sky. She is not beyond redemption, he said. No one is, if they're willing to change. He stood, walked to the window, and clasped his hands behind his back. We talk about justice so often, he said. But forget that justice without mercy turns cold, and mercy without truth becomes hollow. The aide waited, listening. She saw herself today not as she wanted to be, but as she was. That's the hardest mirror to face. He turned back. Let her learn. Let the world learn. We don't rise by humiliating others. We rise by showing what it means to lead with heart. He picked up the folder. Prepare the statement, but let it speak not of shame. Speak of hope, of the power in ordinary people to make extraordinary change. Yes, Mr. President. As the aide left, Traoré sat again at his desk. He glanced once more at the drawer where Clara's letter now rested, tucked away not as a trophy, but as a seed, of growth, of humility, of the quiet revolution that begins inside the heart. Come in, he called. His assistant entered, clutching a folder. Sir, we've received hundreds of messages, letters of support from citizens, apologies from airline employees, even children's drawings. The people were moved, the aide added. Traoré nodded thoughtfully. I never intended for that incident to become spectacle. I only sought a moment of ordinary humanity. I understand, sir, replied the assistant, but your quiet reaction resonated more powerfully than any speech. President Traoré rose and walked to the window, gazing out over the presidential grounds. I've realized, he said, that forgiveness alone isn't sufficient. We must also educate. What happened wasn't merely an isolated lapse. It's a reflection of what still festers in many hearts. He turned to his aide. Launch a nationwide initiative. Call it the Dignity Project. We'll integrate respect lessons into school curricula, train service personnel, and champion kindness in every sector. Let this story catalyze genuine transformation. The assistant smiled. Right away, sir. Meanwhile, in France, Clara remained suspended without pay as the airline investigated. But she refused to idle her days. She volunteered at a local refugee shelter, serving meals, scrubbing floors, folding linens, listening closely to each person's story. One morning, she handed a warm blanket to a small African girl seated alone, clutching a worn teddy bear. Clara knelt beside her. What's your name? Aminata, the child whispered. That's beautiful, Clara said gently. Kids at school call me dirty, Aminata admitted, eyes downcast. Clara's chest tightened. She took a steadying breath. That's a lie. You're as lovely as your name. That night, Clara wept again, this time from compassion rather than guilt. She recognized that careless words could wound a child's spirit for years. She sat down and penned another letter to the president. Dear President Traoré, I don't expect you to respond, but I need you to know that I'm changing. Not out of fear, but because I was wrong. Every day, I meet people who remind me of you. Quiet, dignified, and worthy. I see them now, truly see them. Thank you for your silence. Spoke loud enough to awaken me. Clara. Months later, President Traoré stood before a packed lecture hall at a Ghanaian university. Cameras and press filled the aisles. Dressed simply, he stepped to the lectern. The students fell silent. My experience is hardly unique, he began. Every day, Millions suffer disrespect solely for their appearance, punished not for any wrongdoing, but for someone's prejudice. He paused, sweeping the room with his gaze. I was insulted, ignored, made to feel out of place, not as a head of state but as a man of color. Yet I remained silent, not from weakness, but to truly listen. The audience leaned forward. Listen, he urged, to others' suffering, to your conscience, to the inner voice that insists every human deserves honor. Behind him, the screen displayed his closing line in bold. If your power diminishes others, it is not strength. It is frailty. The crowd rose to its feet, applause echoing like thunder. That very phrase soon adorned school walls, printed on shirts, and appeared in airports across the globe. If your power diminishes others, it is not strength. It is frailty. Years on, people would recall that one flight as the moment the world paused in self-reflection. The day a humble man in Situa taught the meaning of dignity. The day a proud woman's heart cracked, and then mended. The day silence roared louder than hatred. And so the lesson endured, not just in history books or speeches, but in the simple acts of kindness we extend to the person next to us, whether in first-class economy or on the street.